Oh, well, now that Kevin has it. He did that on purpose. So, again, a little reminder that we're in uncharted territory. We don't typically have this many guests at a work session. What we hope to achieve tonight is to talk about what we want to accomplish in the work session, how the norms are for a group this size. We're going to have a few minutes and discuss the feedback we got from 1119, which I sent in the email you would have received from me, a link to reading that feedback. Kevin will talk about school finances and give sort of an overview, and if you've heard him talk in any forum, that'll be a review for you, but if you haven't heard him, it'll just give everyone a chance to be on the level playing field. And then that next sort of section with 5-year forecasts and opportunities, that's when a real opportunity for discussion happens. But truly, anytime something comes up and you need a question or clarification, just sort of speak up. We don't normally raise our hands like a classroom, but again, since there's so many of us, just sort of interject. So we'll figure it out. We'll find a rhythm to it. So that's our plan for this evening. So the objectives for this work session are, next slide. I can't switch slides. Next page. We did not rehearse our Pat Sajak and Van White. The objectives are to help the Board of Education determine whether a March operating levy is feasible. If it is feasible, to help determine what combination of millage and cuts would be supported in the community, and if it is not feasible, start a discussion of what work would need to happen between now and August/November. So those are the objectives for tonight, and we'll keep coming back to that about whether that discussion is impacting our ability to inform the board around March or not. And if it's not about informing March, then we'll try to move away from that topic. Some of the norms that we'll talk about, but feel free to add any of these if there's something that you need to make yourself comfortable to participate in addition to these, or if there's something up here you're uncomfortable with, now would be a good time to speak up. But a norm for the group will be to stay focused on the objectives. That is a challenge that we have at board work sessions in general, is making sure that we accomplish the work that we set out to, that we don't get down on the paths because it's an evening, and while we like each other's company, sometimes we forget how late it's getting. So that is, we hold ourselves accountable we try to hold ourselves accountable to stay on the objectives. I encourage you to listen to understand. In big groups like this, and when topics are challenging, many times we listen, or while someone's talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say next, rather than listening to understand the person who's speaking. So I encourage you to listen to learn some new things tonight. We encourage you to be in a stance of seeking solutions and being open to solutions of others, hopefully for some creativity, and to be critical of ideas and not people. Are there other things that anyone would like to add to that? Hearing none, move on. Okay, so we might just take 10 short minutes tonight to operationalize a little bit around that feedback that we heard on the 19th. So if you could take just a few minutes, I'm sure that you've probably already done this in your head if you've read that. But to think about what are some of those big ideas that you heard or that you read in the feedback from the 19th. And each idea, put it on a separate Post-it note. So, for instance, I would take one if I had a Post-it note and say, thank you, I have a whole bag of those. Say one of the things that I heard loud and clear was the number was too large. So I'm writing too large on one of my Post-it notes. Right? And then you're going to write whatever the things that you heard, what were the reasons that you voted yes, no, whatever the things read in there, start to write those down. Just do that on your own, each idea on a separate Post-it note. I'm giving you 2 minutes for it. It's like a classroom activity. 2 minutes, just start writing them down. One on each separate Post-it notes. Ultimately, no one else has to read these. So your handwriting is, you're going to be in charge of reading your own words. So 2 minutes, go.
Oh.
have a little stack of Post-it notes in front of you in a minute. About 30 more seconds. Your thought? Then with the people near you, start to gather them together in like ideas. So if I'm here with John and Victoria and Michael, I'm going to say, I had one that was set too large. Anyone else have that? Great. So we're going to start making a little pile of too large. So start put them in piles that make sense.
No, you're good, you're good. I had that one.
Every outlet project, 3 counties.
Start, because you guys are still working. I'll start over here and ask this group to give me one of their big categories. And if that sort of captures yours, you'll move that off to the side. And then we'll go around. And then somebody goes, I think the category is maybe not quite named exactly right. Okay. All right, so what did you guys start with over here? What was one of yours?
Too many needs versus wants. Or wants versus needs, I guess I should say.
Okay. Said your handwriting didn't matter, but mine kind of does. Next group?
Us?
We had unsure about where the money was going, financial responsibility, transparency.
Okay. Next group?
We talked about the suddenness and the impact, both on the city, financial impact, and on property.
Okay.
Land need versus existing land, Grailville, sort of combined in this.
Let's call it land. Let's call it land.
Land.
Next group?
Master plan.
Can you be more specific?
I can be very specific if you want me to be.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to, we did a Pareto analysis of it, and I'm not trying to take this thing over, but, so we had the driver reasons that 266 feedbacks you got at the meeting last week were master plan economics and cost and board of election trust and timing. That was 84% of the responses you got last week.
So what I was kind of hoping for, like I did something similar. The idea sort of was to operationalize that globally. So you want to just pick one of these up here that's different.
You got master plan up there?
Well, I see land and I see wants over needs.
I don't know what about just people, that this was the #1 item that people that voted no. we'll consider.
referenced a master plan. And I think some people reference
Which
maybe.
might be communications, it might be cost, it might be everything, but it's just.
So financial impact is cost. I heard trust, clarity, transparent. Should I put trust here with this
Yeah,
one?
that's fine.
Okay. Next group,
We have fear of consequences.
what does that mean?
Families would have to move with some of those others.
That was a big one. The
So,
impact on them.
so financial impact, that around that? Okay.
We also said a need for, people voted yes because there was a need for K-4 buildings. I know so far we're identifying no's, but
Does someone say needs versus
Dr.
wants?
Krantz, could you use a different color because
I
it's
can.
really impossible to read that?
I sure can.
That'd be great. Thank you.
First one needs versus wants.
Yeah, the
Well,
first
I-
one, wants versus needs.
Well, I read that, wants versus needs, and for me, I would say wants versus needs when I read it, like, some of the athletic things I questioned, but I did read a theme of people wanting a K through 4.
yeah, I'm saying something different than the wants versus needs that's
I
already
think
up
you're
there.
saying there's a need for more space. I think maybe like that.
And
They-
even more
people are
specifically, like,
realizing our need for space. and our-
It's really,
We have a
what,
lot.
what do you really need?
So I'm
what
just
you want, but not
talking about
necessarily
things
need.
that I saw show up. And so one of the things that I saw show up was that people voted yes because of that, what they identify as a need for space.
Next group?
One of the yes reasons that we felt we saw was a desire to support teachers and support programs at the schools.
Start swinging back around to anything that your things don't fit under? This isn't anything scientific, it's just sort of data.
It was too large and too long. Is that up there?
Say it again?
Like too large of an amount for too long of a time.
So
Would that just be-
financial impact?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Keep going around?
We kind of saw a trend of people were saying they weren't getting clear answers. They weren't getting their questions answered clearly. Which might go with
Okay.
transparency.
Next group, anything new?
Ours were all covered.
Scare tactics.
Safety being one.
Like the time analysis for the final resolution, so once everything came down, that time frame was too short.
Say it again.
The time to analyze the final resolution that came out in July to vote, that timing was too short for people to comprehend and like really understand what was going on.
I heard sudden earlier and time, I mean. Okay. Right. So the idea there is to just think about, this was feedback about, you know, where was that miss, or where were opportunities, not opportunities, where were ideas that most people heard were misses that we want to make sure we take into account in making any decisions about recommendations for March and November. So we don't want to go down one path and then realize that we're setting ourselves up for one of these major hurdles again. Does that make sense? All right, so that's just a quick reminder of where we were on the 19th. And then the other part that we want to remind everyone about before we get into the analysis is the next slide. Is the purpose, and this sort of gets to some of the feedback about supporting teachers in schools, which I heard anecdotally throughout the campaign, is this the purpose that we have is the goal is to improve student outcomes in schools. Like that's the work that we do. So we have a Board of Education that makes policy, that makes decisions and guides the district and guides the work that we do through a vision and a mission. And the vision of the school district for a long time has been to prepare students for tomorrow today. And that mission and the work that the board drives their decision and their expectations forward is around growth, care, and innovation. You have a copy in your folder of the district expectations and the work that the board did to direct the administrative team on developing, the next slide, developing our school improvement plans. So the board develops these expectations and said, this is what we want to have happen in our school district. This is what we're going to hold you accountable for. It's how I'm evaluated. It's the evaluations that we use for the administrators in the buildings to implement district and building improvement plans around student growth and increasing opportunities for kids, raising student achievement measures, increasing opportunities for College Credit Plus, career pathways, creating time for intervention in the day, and recruiting and retaining the highest quality educators and administrators that we can find. Around care, it's about addressing mental health needs and looking for programs around mental health needs. It's about increasing safety, safety fixtures, adding school resource officers, things like that, making systematic improvements and working with local law enforcement. And then around innovation, how do we partner with other school districts? How do we learn from the way other school districts do business? How do small groups of school districts work together to create something bigger? Developing maker spaces and opportunities for kids to build things in schools, and empowering teachers and students who are early adopters to be leaders in technology and part of our Loveland X team, so that they're piloting and pushing us forward in order to address that mission. And so when we talk about, and then we worked this last year to develop Portrait of a Tiger. You have a copy of that. That's really trying to put some meat on the bones of what we would like the student experience to be. So when we talk about, when we make decisions on our side, and when we make our decisions about priorities and how we do business, it's always related to our building and our district goals and outcomes. And then Kevin is responsible for making sure that we budget for those things and we work through our 5-year forecast. But that's the work we do ongoing all of the time, and then provide updates to the board and they to hold us accountable for that. So while we're remembering these things, where this is where our big miss was in November, this is where our big hit is. This is where we're doing really well, where we have great teachers, where we have great programs, where we've shown great improvements over the last few years. So how do we make decisions moving forward that we don't miss, but that we also don't go backwards here? How do we find that balance? So those are those big ideas that we have in the room in order to help us make decisions and understand how we do all of our work on an ongoing basis. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry. So as you look at this, where would the board's position be on where you have gaps? Because I would imagine that's what led into the formation of what the plan was. So if this is the lighthouse vision, there was a gap versus this, okay? And so
from the operating standpoint, that would be looking at the additional teachers each year. So in the past, that's where we've been adding programs at the high school. Okay. So one of the gaps at the elementary level is class size, but we're out of space. So that then led into that master plan, and that's the connection there. So the gaps in the past have been looking at the state report card, making sure kids had access to high-level courses, making sure there was interventions in place for students who were lacking behind, making sure that we were offering new and different digital arts instead of just traditional arts, and those kinds of things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to hop into a lot of different discussions here. Can you hear me over there? Okay. Please throw something at me if you can't. My voice doesn't project super well. So anyway, so the timeline of discussions and potential actions. So what we're in the process of doing is trying to determine a March versus November ballot issue. And this is just some information to keep in the back of your minds that's incredibly important because there are some deadlines that is required of us. So today's meeting is talking about the operating fund needs. We have a meeting a week from today, which again, you all will be involved in. And that is determining some permanent improvement needs, including the property. So we are not going to talk specifically today about the property. We will talk about that a week from today. We're going to focus a little bit more on operations currently. So 2 weeks from today, if we are going to go on the ballot in March, what is required is what's called a resolution of necessity. So a resolution of necessity is stating the millage amount, and that would be put to Hamilton County Auditor, and what they would do is they would certify the amounts. So the reason why there's a week in between is because they need some time to certify the amounts. I have confirmed with their staff that they will not be on vacation that week, so we should be good for that time frame. And then the 17th is basically just taking what they've given back to us and a resolution for it. The reason why that's important is because December 18th is the deadline to be on the ballot in March. It has to be to the Board of Elections down in Norwood by end of business on the 18th. So these are very important deadlines. One thing that's also important to be aware of, and we will bring this up multiple times, is if the levy is passed in 2020, the first time that the school district will receive funds is January of 2021. So January of 21 is the first new collections for property taxes. So what I'm going to hop into is overview of school funding. Again, as Amy said, this is some stuff that we've talked about through this whole process. So for some of you, it might be review. For others, it may be new information, and there's no better time to kind of look at this again. So I'm going to go over this really quickly on this part because we're going to dive deeper into these specific areas. But there's 3 primary areas of total revenue to the district. State funding is roughly 32%. So state funding is what's called guaranteed from the state of Ohio. Again, we will hop into what that actually really means specifically. And that line item is flat funded. The second one is local funding. So that is local property taxes. That's 58% of the total budget, the total revenue portion. And that as well is flat funded. And the largest remaining portion is federal funding. We will not go into a lot of detail on this because A, it's not very much, and specifically the reason we won't go into it is because when you receive federal funds from grants, they are for specific areas in the district. So our 2 largest grants are IDAB, which is special education funding, and Title I, which is for, yes, sir.
Idea B and Title I federal funding. So those show up as expenses as well. So then there's an offsetting amount for those?
What do you mean by offsetting?
Well, for example, in 2019, $178,000 was Idea Part B instruction, curriculum development professional, for example,
Sure.
right? Which was the first year that showed up, $178,000.
Sure.
Was there an income then of $178,000 that offset that expenditure?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what happens, and we'll talk about it in more detail. So this is total revenue. When you talk about the operating account, it's just one particular fund. It's our largest fund. It really runs the district. When you look at these, there's a separate fund number. So we do fund accounting. There's a separate fund. You spend the money, and then you get reimbursed from the federal government. But it doesn't get receipted into the general fund. It gets receipted back to take care of those expenses that you're talking about.
Okay.
Did that make?
So from the general fund is 01, for example, in the coding, right?
Yeah.
So what is the federal funding code?
IDIB is 516.
Thank you.
Yeah. Title I is 572. So these are for specific items, and they have to be used during that fiscal year. So there's not necessarily a way to hold on to the funds to do something in the future. You really have to use them that year specifically. So there's a lot of information on the Ohio Department of Education if you're interested in looking at that more. But what we're going to jump into are those two largest items. So first is state funding. So we are what's called a guaranteed district. So in the state of Ohio, there's roughly 610 school districts. What happens is, from a state funding standpoint, you really want to be what's on the formula. So there is a formula for the state, but only about 100 school districts are on the formula. What you have is a guarantee, a formula, and then you have a cap. So there's districts on the cap guaranteed, about 500 districts are on either one of those. So the reality is they're not on a formula. A guaranteed or a cap district based.
Now we're cooking with gas. Here we are.